before I get started telling you about my dreaming with daylight, I want to express my gratitude. So I'm going to mention again John Pierce, his tireless efforts to put this event together, and for inviting me to be here today. Thank you, John. Yeah, absolutely. And I'd also like to express gratitude to the Cherry Creek School District, a district that really truly is committed to excellence and with whom I've had some wonderful opportunities to dream together and create environments to have 21st century learning. So thank you, Cherry Creek. And yeah, absolutely. And as I am an architect, and you'll hear more about that in just a moment, I need to express my added gratitude to my many clients, past and present, who have been willing to dream with me and allow me to help them fulfill their dreams. Because after all, as an architect, without clients, you're like a broken pencil. Pointless, right? You may have heard that one before. So let me get started. So I'm an architect, and I'm also a daylight researcher. I've been doing this for 35 years. Hard to believe it's been that long, but still a lot of things that I'm looking forward to accomplishing. My medium, my materials are stone, brick, concrete, glass, the kind of things we all think of as buildings. But really, when I dream about buildings, I dream with light. That's my real medium. Now, in all my years of practice, I've only been offered a bribe once. You might be wondering, okay, when was that happen? Well, actually, I was designing an elementary school for a client. And I was meeting with a group of teachers to find out what their needs were for this building. And partway through that session, one of the teachers reached in a pocket, pulled something out, and slid it across the table. I'm making sure I've got the right image here, and I'm not sure that I do, but I should be looking at a $20 bill. There it is. That's what came across the table toward me. So I just stared at that for a few minutes, totally clueless. I finally had to say, you're going to have to tell me what that's for. I have no idea. And so the teacher told me this. He said, I want you to make sure my classroom has plenty of windows because I can't stand to work in a space without them. And I have to tell you, in all my years practicing, that represents the most universal request that I get. Virtually every one of my clients has always asked to be able to look outside and to bring daylight in. It truly is a universal desire. This is the building that resulted from those sessions with those teachers. And you can see that it does have plenty of windows to look outside and appreciate the beautiful surroundings all around this building. And for the record, I should state, I returned the $20 bill. And that should have been the point in which I realized in my career I wasn't going to get fabulously wealthy doing this particular job. But $20 only goes so far. But besides having those windows, you can probably see in these images, this building also has a lot of skylights. Because to really have great daylight and a great space, you need multiple sources of this natural resources. And this building has been enduringly popular with parents, with students, with teachers from the day it opened. I can't tell you exactly why I'm so interested in daylight, but I can tell you it's something that's been with me as long as I can remember. I've always been fascinated by it, wanted to study it, and wanted to use it in my work. And I also marvel at the amazing origins of this gift that we call daylight. I think about a photon, that most basic packet of light, born in the center of the sun under incredible temperature and pressure. From that point of birth, it may take many tens of thousands of years to work its way to the surface of the sun. But once it gets there, it dashes across space and reaches the earth in a mere 8 minutes. And what do we earthlings do with this gift when it arrives here? I look at this photo and I think about that. I wonder, will the trees use that photon to power photosynthesis? Will the bird use it to guide its migration? Or perhaps we humans will be smart enough to capture it and use it in a building like this, one of my favorites, by the way, in Barcelona, and use that photon to bring stone to life. One of my favorite books is The Last Child in the Woods. I'm sure of a few, maybe many of you have read that book. But it documents the disturbing trend for our children to spend too much time indoors and too much time with technology. And when we do that, when we disconnect from nature and disconnect from daylight, we do ourselves a lot of harm. Now, but nature deficit disorder isn't limited to our children. I believe it's equally a problem for adults. In fact, I think someone needs to write another book called The Last Adult in the Woods. We do, don't we? But in our daily lives, as adults, we spend so much time inside our houses, inside our cars and vehicles, inside our work environments. And too many of those environments look like this image that you're seeing on the screen. So I want to take a poll, although I'll hardly be able to see if you raise your hands. But I'm curious, what do you think about how much time the average American does spend indoors? And this is including those whose jobs actually include being outside. So how many of you would think that the average American spends, say, 70% of his time indoors? No, nobody, a couple people think that. Okay, how about 80% of our time indoors? Yeah, now I'm seeing a lot more hands. And how about, let's go all the way to 90%. Are we almost entirely indoor creatures? Well, 90% actually is a figure you may hear quite a bit. In reality, the EPA actually tracks this, and they can tell us exactly how much time we're spending indoors. And it's shocking. It's 93%. A trivial 7% is how much we allow ourselves to be outside. We have imprisoned ourselves inside our buildings, and we're overlooking the harmful side effects of doing so. Now, the purpose of my talk today is not to reverse that trend of spending too much time inside. That's way beyond the scope of what I normally deal with. My real purpose is to describe how we can stay connected to nature in a very powerful way, even when we are inside our buildings. I'm not going to deal with the cars, by the way. That's another topic. So I can tell you again, as an architect, I'm convinced through all my years of practice that daylight is the key to staying connected when we're inside. Now, I'm using the term daylight and daylighting a lot in this talk. So I need to give you a little bit better definition than what you may think daylight actually is. And when you look at an image like this, and John kind of referred to this in his introduction, you see many actual sources of daylight. Now, all daylight has as its origin the sun, but it gets a little more complicated than that. So in this photo, we have the sun, of course, but the entire blue sky is a source of daylight. The clouds are sources of daylight. Light reflected off the water, and even light reflected off the land. All of those are sources and resources that we can put to work, and we do. Even when I have a completely overcast sky, such as this, I still have plenty of daylight to put to work. It's been refracted countless times by all the moisture in the atmosphere, but it's there, and we use it. And it's important for me to mention this, because a lot of people ask me, don't you need the sun to have daylight? And the answer is no, not at all. In fact, at night, we even have a drizzle of daylight reflected off the moon. And even that can be put to use. So when we take this free, abundant resource of daylight and bring it inside our building, then we have daylighting. It shouldn't be very hard, because all we have to do is take between 1% and 5% of that resource that's outside and bring it in and spread it around. But it's maddeningly difficult, because the sun, of course, keeps moving on us, the weather keeps changing, and our own needs as humans change as we move around our spaces. It actually takes a lot of practice and experience to get good at implementing daylighting in a space. But when we do it, and we can turn the lights off and still have visual comfort, we've harvested daylight. Now, when I first started this, harvesting daylight in buildings, I had one primary motivation. This, by the way, was many years ago. And that motivation was save energy to help the environment. Pretty simple, right? It works because, again, daylight is free and abundant, and it's completely non-polluting. So when you use that in a building and keep the electric lights off, you in fact can save tremendous amounts of energy helping the environment. And this building that you saw earlier is just one example of that. Now, in comparison to daylight, all electric or artificial lighting uses electricity naturally, and most of that electricity comes from power plants, most of which burn fossil fuels. And in fact, electric lighting is one of the largest users of energy in our entire country. Most people don't realize what a big share of our total energy use goes to that use. Now, here's something really interesting. As I began working in this field, I started to understand that we use a lot of electric light at night, but an awful lot during the day as well. In fact, here's one more poll I want to ask you. How much of our electric light do you think we actually use at nighttime when we need it most? Who would say, let's guess, 70%? Anybody think 70%? No hands yet. Okay, 80% of our light at night? No? Okay, a few. 90%? No? Okay. Well, I can't tell you the answer from the EPA, because the EPA doesn't care about this one. But I've done my own calculation, and according to that, we actually use only 42% of our electric light at night. That means the majority gets used in the day when we already have a free, abundant resource that we could use. My dream is to change that, because there's absolutely no reason, other than the will to do so, that we can't get rid of most electric lighting use during the day. But the way to do that isn't to design buildings that look like all-glass towers. All-glass buildings are actually quite a negative thing to do environmentally. They're energy hogs. And if the sun is out, you may need to wear sunglasses during the day to be visually comfortable inside. It's the wrong answer. Actually, a beautifully daylighted building looks a lot more like this. It's about a delicate balance of windows, skylights, light pipes in the right places, in the right size, all working together in harmony. And daylighting technology has fortunately advanced so rapidly that we have many more tools at our disposal. Windows and skylights have improved dramatically, and we have an entirely new kinds of devices that track the sun and can beam it hundreds of feet away from where we gather it and deliver it exactly where we need it. That's right, we're actually piping light around our buildings now. In fact, if we systematically implemented or harvested daylight more effectively, we could save as much electricity as the entire state of California uses every year. Isn't that amazing? 500 power plants equivalent. And yet we choose not to do so. But I want to take you back now. Let's think about that teacher and the $20 bill. His motivation wasn't to save energy. It wasn't even to help the environment. It was more basic than that. What he was after was simply a great place in which to teach and to learn. And you know, he was absolutely onto something. He was completely right. Because in the last many years, we've got some great research that's come out, and it's shown that daylight impacts us humans in some profound ways. And here are just a few of those. We get better sleep at night. We have higher test scores in school. We have faster recovery rates in hospitals, and on and on. The benefits just keep accumulating the more we investigate what is happening here. Now, I've been researching this and these other related issues for some 30 years, and I have concluded that there are three main reasons daylight does these things for us. So I'm going to share with you now the three secrets that make daylight so wonderful. The first is really simple. You could almost overlook it, but it's the view. Because when we create a building that allows daylight to come in, we almost inevitably allow ourselves to see out. But what we've learned more recently is that the quality of that view makes all the difference. When I can only see a man-made surface, maybe a brick wall, hardly any benefit to having that view. But if I can see natural elements, trees, flowers, shrubs, maybe a bird or a butterfly, all of a sudden the beneficial impact explodes. In fact, if you're inside a hospital room and you have a great view, you're much more likely to get released from that room earlier. There's solid research that actually shows that. The second secret about daylight is spectrum. Now, you've probably seen a chart like this at some point in a textbook somewhere, and you probably remember seeing the spectrum like this from violet through red. The remarkable thing about this daylight spectrum is how even and balanced it is. Very few ups and downs, not big spikes. It's really remarkable. And this is the light under which we evolved. Our eyes, our brains, our bodies are completely attuned to this particular spectrum of light. And we got to dig a little deeper now. And this is where the research in the last decade gets fascinating. Everybody who took high school biology, you probably remember rods and cones, right? Everybody remember rods and cones? Yeah? Well, what we didn't know, at least when I took high school biology, is this entirely another kind, a third type of photoreceptor in our eye. But we're not aware that it's there or that it's working. It's happening completely at a subconscious level. And what this third kind of receptor is doing, it's scanning the sky for a narrow sliver of light. And it happens to be that sliver accentuated there. It's called circadian light. It's amazing. That little sliver of light working through those few cells in our eyes controls our hormonal systems. Everything about how we wake up, how we go to sleep, how we regulate our energy during the day starts with those few cells and that little sliver of light. So no wonder when we're deprived of daylight, things don't go so well. Our bodies literally get out of sync. Now, what happens when we surround ourselves in artificial light? Now, it's the case that fluorescent light, which is throughout this building and almost every other large building in the world, is very different than daylight. Here you see the two of them superimposed on each other. You notice how much is missing from that fluorescent light? It's staggering, isn't it? In fact, fluorescent light plays a trick on our eyes. It fools us into thinking it's like daylight, when in reality it's completely different. And if you look at that little band of circadian light, guess what? It's almost completely missing from fluorescent and most other electric lights. So we've got a real problem. And without daylight, whether by being outside or whether being inside a daylighted building, we have real problems. So here's the third thing about daylighting, the real secret. It's variable. Even in a day that seems so uniform, there are minute and subtle variations in intensity, in color, in direction. This was a time lapse that I just showed you inside my office, taken just over a few hours. And you can see how dramatically the daylight varied just in that short period of time. And I've become convinced that that variation is like music for the visual cortex of our brains. It's a gentle stimulus. It keeps us awake. It keeps us engaged. And we deprive ourselves of that and stay inside with unvarying electric light. We put ourselves to sleep. So what we've learned is that in order to wake up and stay engaged throughout the day, we need this kind of light, the kind that we would get from a blue sky, or that we could get if we were inside a well-daylighted building. Or, at the end of the day, to prepare for that restoration of sleep, we need a different kind of light. Again, the kind that we would get if we were outside or inside a beautifully daylighted building. So, isn't it obvious that when we're inside, we could benefit from view from the right spectrum of light, from variability? I think so. And my dream is to get every building in the United States and beyond to use this kind of design strategy so we feel connected to nature no matter where we are or how much we're inside. As my wife and I were building our own house a few years ago, Christy, thank you, we naturally set out to make it daylighted. In fact, that's what we did. No matter where you are, even inside our closets, we don't turn on the light during the day. And something magical happened along the way. We learned that when we live in a daylighted house, the moon is our nightlight. Thanks. And now you know everything you need to know about daylight.